Good evening, and welcome to this session of I Believe, But Why? So, in this series, I am just sharing some of the stories of my own formation, why I believe, and I'm taking some questions and your questions, which you can send to me via email, Samuel at stpaulsct.org, and I will respond to them. And so today's question, first what I'll do is I'll share with you the question, and then I'm going to share my story, and then I'm going to share my response to that question. So the question was sent to me a few weeks ago, I think a couple of weeks ago, or maybe more, by a young woman whose name is Mariam. And she writes, Amjad, I'm doing a research project for school right now, and I am writing about the science, ethics on preserving consciousness via technology, similar to that seen on Netflix's Black Mirror and the new show Upload on Amazon. I am asking individuals of various religions to comment on the following two questions. What does the afterlife mean to you? Would you ever consider an alternate form of consciousness upon death? Whoa. So I wrote back, and I'm not going to share everything that I said to her because I was like, I really don't understand what you are asking me to do because I have never seen those shows. And I requested her that I would like to watch these shows before I can actually respond. But I could also understand that she was on a project timeline and she needed my response. So anyhow, I started watching those shows, and then I wrote my response. I didn't get too far watching them. I just watched one episode and tried to understand what was happening. So I'll come to the response to that question in a moment. But let me share with you that when I was, I would say about 7 or 8 years old, my dad had this really bright idea that he needs to figure out if he can generate light through biogas. And he was, as most of you know, he was a bishop, and so his diocese was all rural. And so this would have revolutionized how people lived in villages, because they all have animals, and if they could turn the animal waste into something, some form of energy, that would truly revolutionize their life. So what he did was he hired a German scientist, young guy. He was in his, I think, late 20s, right out of the university, probably. And he hired him to come and live with us in our home in Pakistan and work on this project. So it was a real fun time for us because we had this young man living with us, and he didn't speak much English. He spoke German, and we knew not a single word of German, and we lived together for some time, and so that was quite fun. But the story I want to share with you is that project. So the way the project was going to work is that he was going to construct a pit, okay, and a well, almost a really big size, and all the waste from our water buffaloes. Remember we talked about those water buffaloes last time? All the waste from it would go into that pit or well, and then there was a cone on top, and there was a pipe coming out of it. So as the gas developed in it, that gas would go through a pipe, and at the end there was some form of a lamp with an element on it. And the idea was that this gas would then provide light when it burns. And so, by the way, this is, I'm talking about the late 70s, and now, almost 30 plus years, or almost 40 years, I hate to say that, it's actually a viable technology. People use it. It's a workable thing. People have found out how to do that. But this is late 70s, so we were still figuring out. The world didn't know how it worked yet. And so this scientist, engineer, was supposed to do that. So my room was like here, and the pit was built right outside my window. So for about a whole year, I had the privilege of really experiencing the experiment itself. And so all of that was collected, put into that pit, and then came that day, that final day, when he was going to light that lamp. And I remember all of our neighbors, they were all there, full of anticipation, excitement, not knowing what was going to happen. And we were all excited to see this experiment work, that there was going to be light. And my dad was also very excited because, a lot of resources had gone into this experiment. And so this young German scientist, engineer, went over, opened the valve for that lamp and took a match and lit that lamp. And what happened there was, puck! And that was it. There was a little bit of catching of fire from the gas that collected for a whole year, and that was it. And my dad was so happy. He was like, it worked! And all of the other people there were like looking at each other and going, where's the light? We saw one little fuck, and that was it. Where is the light? And my dad wouldn't believe, or didn't accept, I should say, that experiment was a total disaster. And for years and years and years after that, we would tease him about it. And he would actually get quite angry with us because he said, you guys don't understand, it worked. Now, what did that teach me in faith? That sometimes we work very hard and we only get to see that little puck. But if we stick with that, then we are sticking with something that the future may give us more clarity, and God may build it up. And 40 years later, it's a technology that actually works. It's a deployable technology, and people use it. And so, what have I learned? How have I been formed? I have been formed by all those instances in my life where there was just a little glimpse, and yet we cling on to it because we know that there is potential and it just might work. So when this young woman asked me this question, by the way, I love it when college students reach out to me and enter this dialogue with me. When she asked me this question, I responded, and I'm just going to read the response I wrote to her. I said, after getting some time to watch an episode, I think I understand now what you mean by human consciousness. So here's my response. As someone who thinks of heaven as a divine promise, the question that interests me is, does what happened in our lives form us in ways that is absolute? Or is there room for divine intervention that may cause someone to be despite the events that may have been formative? Is heaven a collection of our memories, or is it what we dream of? In other words, is it in the past, or is it in the future with possibilities not existing in the past? Is heaven a matter of choice that we can will, or is it a consequence of events in the past? How we arrive at afterlife and whether storing digital information even amounts to the creation of heaven is really dependent on how we approach these questions. So I believe that our formation is dependent on the events we are afforded in our lives. And I also believe that God has a lot to do with those events and how they are presented to us. And then I believe that despite how we may have been formed, God has the ability to transform our lives. All this to say that while storing a log of our being may be a fun and exciting possibility, it does not offer to me the transformative power of God. Hence, if heaven is that beautiful place beyond anyone's imagination, then digital storage cannot make that possible. Also, while memory is the keystone of any religious formation, it can also be the source of despair. We can have information that can bind us to the past. As a pastor, I experience that a lot. I see people who are not able to overcome the loss of their loved ones because Facebook keeps reminding them of the memories they had with them. I counsel couples that are unable to move on from broken relationships because they have mutual friends on the social media who constantly remind them of their life together. I know people today find it very hard to leave behind communities they may have moved out of simply because they are still friends with them on social media. All this clinging to the past brings great harm, for it does not encourage people to look towards the future and have the motivation to build a new life, sometimes start over. So, would keeping things stored digitally forever would be a great thing, even thought of as heaven? Quite the contrary. So, friends, we as believers set our eyes on the future, not on the past. We learn from the past, we remember the past, but we look towards the future. That is what allows us the capacity to receive God's love that is transformational. That is my faith, that is what I believe, and why I believe it. Have a great rest of the week, and please do send me your questions. I would love to share my responses with you.